everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about His Dark Materials. Yeah, if you follow me on social media, you might have guessed we get to this show eventually. I've made it no secret how much this BBC adaptation has caught my enthusiasm, and with season 2 fast approaching, I decided that now is a good time to talk about one of my favorite shows that debuted last year, second only to Infinity Train, His Dark Materials. Now, to get this out of the way, I knew nothing about His Dark Materials going into the show. I just knew that there were some books that exist and demons were involved. That's demons with an A. Much like how I tend to tackle the DuckTales reboot, this video will mostly be focusing on the quality of His Dark Materials as a series on its own, rather than as an adaptation. However, I have since read the first book, and I plan to continue that tradition once each new season concludes. So while comparing the two will not be the sole focus of this video, I will mention differences from time to time. Also, because of this way I'm approaching engaging with the His Dark Materials series, I am asking you lovely viewers very nicely, please do not post spoilers from the other books in the comment section. Of course, I welcome discussion based around the first book and the first season. That's the whole reason I'm making this video. But if anybody tries to be smart and say something along the lines of, "Oh, don't get too attached to that character," you will be blocked and you will make me very sad. Let's just have fun here. But if you are unfamiliar with this series, like I was, here's the basic premise. In a world of humans with spirit, animal, demon things, Lyra Belacqua, played by Daphne Keane, is a young girl who seeks adventure and exploration beyond the walls of her fancy home, clearly suffering from Disney Princess Syndrome. But she gets her wish in ways she never expected as she sets out to save her friend Roger, played by Llewyn Lloyd, and races to find her uncle Lord Asriel, played by James McAvoy, as he seeks answers that pose a threat to the ever-watchful Magisterium. Along the way, Lyra travels far and wide, faces many trials and tribulations, and comes across several characters who she will befriend, inspire, and even betray. That is the most compact way I could put the plot. I don't even know how well I did. His Dark Materials offers a large, complex, and creative world, with each area of its world building also tying into deep personal struggles and forces the characters and the audience into tough situations. It's no wonder these books became as popular as they did if this is the world they inhabit. I was endeared to the world almost immediately when I saw the Comic-Con trailer, but I was not ready for just how intense the journey would be. The biggest thing that I think makes His Dark Materials stand out in its genre is the concept of the demons. This was pretty much the only thing I knew about His Dark Materials beforehand, mostly because it's a go-to fanfic AU right alongside the Hogwarts AU, but I never really gave the concept much attention. But there was just something about seeing that idea in its original setting that was really appealing to me. Maybe it's because I was kind of a lonely kid who didn't have a lot of friends and spent most of my free time engrossed in media, but I've always been a fan of these magical companion for life kind of worlds. I compared it to Pokemon a couple of times before I saw the show, but now it seems more like Digimon to me. A partner who's chosen just for you, who acts as a friend, protector, and conscience, has a deep and sometimes symbiotic connection to its partner, and can grow and change as you do. Demons are described as a person's soul, all taking the form of animals. It's a concept that could have just remained a fun detail, but the relationship between people and their demons winds up being a recurring theme in the series, even when they can't afford to animate them into every single shot that they should probably be in when your soul walks alongside you at all times. But when they are on screen, the animation is beautiful on them. From the silent ones that just accompany their characters, to ones that are very outspoken and act as constant companions and advisors to their people that demand more work in the facial expressions and such, they all feel very alive. I found the animation rather impressive as a whole. And while the demons were part of what sold me on checking out this series, that is not where its world building ends. Far from it. Being based on a book, the show is constantly introducing new elements to its world and how it functions. From different cultures and classes, with a particular focus on the Gyptians and the effects of the Magisterium on areas of society like education, to pieces of fantasy that add to the mystique of this world. Demons are just the tip of the iceberg, though I'd argue they're the most important. There's also witches, armored bears, this mysterious substance called dust, with a capital D, so you know it's important, even the revelation of other worlds and the ability to cross between them. them. This was way more than I signed up for with the show, and at first it all felt kind of overwhelming. Just when you think you got a good grasp on the world, they bring in something new to completely change your understanding of it. But the show as an adaptation does an excellent job juggling all the high fantasy concepts. In a way, it reflects on Lyra slowly getting to see and understand more of the world around her, things she's heard about but hasn't gotten to see firsthand. And while digesting it can be a bit challenging at points, the show presents the concepts from the fantastical to the horrible in a way that feels natural, never makes the audience feel lost in the constant implementing, and that drives and enhances the story they want to tell, rather than bog it down with too much detail. A small but great example of this to me is when the main villains hurt people's demons in confrontations to get the upper hand, which already has a disturbing feeling to it since this hurts their person as well and can apparently even kill them, but I noticed that in a bar fight in another episode, nobody used this tactic. It was a little piece of the world that helped me understand just how despicable other characters' actions truly were. I love just how fleshed out the customs and traditions of this world really are, and again, how much of a role that plays in the main story. The show not only has a lot to establish about the world, but has to introduce and set up many story elements and several characters. This show has a lot of both, and with multiple plot lines, many of which have characters on the move across a vast world, it would have been easy for this to get too complicated to follow, even for an 8-episode season, but the show does a good job at presenting everything. From majesty and wonder to deep betrayal and conspiracy, from fantastical concepts and creatures to characters just fighting for their right to live their lives. Even in the quieter moments of the show, it's never dull and always had me invested in the proceedings no matter what was happening. I thought about going through the events episode by episode to really present the intricacies and give you guys a good idea of what my engagement with the show felt like, but it got really long-winded and elaborate, and as much as I love this show, I can't do another 30-minute video, guys. I just can't. Plus, I want this video to gauge interest in the show for those who might not have given it a chance before. I won't go too deep into specific plot points and what I think people would consider major spoilers, but if what I've said made you curious enough and you don't want to know anything else, this might be the time to tune out and check out the show for yourself. For those still here, let's get specific with one of my favorite aspects of a review that will give us a good sense of the heart of the story, the characters. His Dark Materials is sort of an ensemble cast show, with new characters being introduced well into the season and roles shifting considerably as the events of the story demand it. So the way I'm going to go about this is introducing most of them in the order they run into our main character, Lyra, going over them as characters in their own right and the role they play in Lyra's journey. The first character we see on the show is the one closest to Lyra for the first couple of episodes, or at least she wishes was the closest, Lord Asriel, who kind of becomes the catalyst of the events of the series, doing controversial research into dust that was being investigated by a professor at the college by the name of Grumman. More on that in a bit, but it sure does help to have your first episode take place at a college, makes the exposition feel far more natural. Need to set up the major conflict and obstacles of the entire series? Have James McAvoy give a lecture on it. Hey, it works. And I see McAvoy has recaptured that mad scientist spark he ignited back in Victor Frankenstein. Is this just how James McAvoy acts? Did he play Charles Xavier like this? Lyra is eager to be around Asriel and join him on his expeditions to the north, but Asriel keeps his distance for the most part. Whether that's to keep her safe, or just because he's so absorbed in his work he doesn't find Lyra a priority, is unclear. He has a weird relationship with her in that regard. Lyra's ambitious and even mischievous, but she's also caring. She wants to see the world, and she wants to do it with those closest to her, but circumstances make that impossible. The show makes it clear that Lyra is about to be confronted with a lot, but you get the sense that this kid can make it through okay. And the first major test of that comes with our main villain for the series, Mrs. Coulter, played spectacularly by Ruth Wilson. And I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying she's the villain. With Lyra's constant desire to be noticed and for the adults in her life to see her potential and ambition, it's easy to see why she would be drawn in so easily by Mrs. Coulter, but you as an audience member do not trust this lady for a second. Or at least I didn't. She wants to mold Lyra into someone who can thrive in society as she apparently has. But it soon becomes clear that Mrs. Coulter isn't about nurturing or mentoring, but controlling. Not only through her treatment of Lyra to foster her strictly on her terms, but she's also an agent with the Magisterium, heading a project that involves kidnapping children for an experiment. She has this air of insisting she knows what's best for everyone, and is willing to go to any lengths to get people to line up with her way of thinking. It gets really creepy Scoresby, and that monkey of hers is not helping with her image. Mrs. Coulter has a very unusual, and I'm going to assume unhealthy relationship with her demon. He doesn't speak, despite being a very present demon. He acts aggressively towards others, and passive to the point of being frightened around Mrs. Coulter, and we never find out his name. She seems to hate the thing. It both adds to the disturbing nature Mrs. Coulter gives off, and even helps establish more of the rules around demons in horrifying ways. On that note, Ruth Wilson does a magnificent job in this role, portraying her as caring yet controlling, manipulative yet over her head, with calming talks to establish control and moments in private where she has fits of rage. It feels like there's even more layers to her that we haven't gotten to in this season, and we've already peeled through quite a few. But as much as Lyra is devastated by how much Mrs. Coulter betrayed her trust and faith in her, she gets up and acts quickly. That's the thing about Lyra. She has big aspirations and is maybe a bit too reckless and trusting, but she never forgets what and who is really important. And she's clever and intuitive enough to seek answers when Mrs. Coulter is trying very hard to hide them from her, willing to go the extra mile to set a major wrong right, especially when she realizes that it involves her friend Roger. It makes her a real three-dimensional character to carry such an involved story. But she didn't come out of that experience with Mrs. Coulter unscathed, being much less trustworthy than the next set of adults who want to take her in, the Gyptians. This is another area of Lyra as a character that I like. She might be a remarkable kid, destined to do great things, but she's still a kid, easily hurt by realizing that people who say they care about you and believe in you can be deceiving. One of Lyra's greatest hurdles to overcome in the series is wanting something simple like honesty, but having to deal with the consequences of both giving trust to an untrustworthy person and the hard truths that will come when the adults in her life try to earn that trust. In a way, it kind of presents the difficulties of trying to grow up, between her and Egyptian boy Tony Costa, played by Daniel Frogson, trying to be taken more seriously. Prove that they are able to contribute and wanting to take on responsibility they feel they're capable of handling, only to see just how challenging and scary facing those obstacles can be. The question is, can they still face it? And for a while anyway, the answer seems to be yes. With some difficulty, and maybe a good guiding hand. Where characters like Mrs. Coulter show that not everyone can be trusted, the Gyptians show that some still can be. Ma Costa, played by Anne-Marie Duff, is just what Lyra needed, with Duff portraying her as someone who is warm and loving, yet tough and steadfast. A worried and loving mother, but a strong one willing to do whatever it takes to get her youngest son Billy back and help protect Lyra. She's a real anchor for Lyra, and is the first adult in the series to trust her enough to take her seriously. Then there's John Fa, played by Lucian Misamati. I'm so sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. The leader of the Gyptians Lyra winds up traveling with, who's this mix of caring and empathetic, but also stern and cautious. He's driven to find the child kidnapper, since the Gyptians have been affected the most by it, but has trouble accepting more unconventional methods of executing this mission. To get through to him, you need the show don't tell approach. Lyra proves time and again that she's capable of implementing unconventional methods to help them get their children back, and Lord Fa needs less convincing each time. But even though he has a grand presence in the story, there's not much else to his character. At least not at the moment. Compared to our third significant Gyptian, Farder Karam, played by James Cosmo, who not only becomes protective of Lyra rather quickly, to the point that she takes him into her confidence more than once, and learns quickly of Lyra's capabilities and knows when to step back and just let her take the lead, but he also gets a backstory. When the witches are introduced, we find out that Farder Karam had a relationship with one of them, but for reasons I won't get into here because trying to be fairly spoiler-free, it didn't work out. And they haven't seen each other until they had to call in the witches for reinforcements. Karam even gets to have a moment alone with his witch, Serafina, played by Ruta Gedmintis? Again, sorry if I butchered that. It's not the most important scene in the show, and especially not in the episode it occurs in, but I always love that extra bit of care given to side characters. It's a moment that's loving, yet struck with grief at what they lost, including their time apart. Karam is very warm, compassionate, and understanding of the unconventional, and his past with Serafina really explains why. Speaking of the unconventional, though, we've got a couple more recruits to talk about, one of which was the ping that put this show on my radar.
Lee Scoresby, aeronaut for hire.
Of him. He's everywhere.
Yes, I will concede that the first reason the show caught my attention was because I saw Mr. Lin-Manuel Miranda doing press at Comic-Con, and I was wondering what the heck he was doing there. So, despite how much the show was winning me over on its own merits, there was a part of me impatiently waiting for him to show up. But the wait was totally worth it. Lee Scoresby definitely adds his own flavor to the show. Not only is it another interesting character with a unique occupation, being an aeronaut, but his attitude and approach to tasks is different from the other characters we've met up to this point. Lee is sort of a silver-tongued con man with a heart of gold, easily getting into trouble, but usually having good reasons for doing so. Thankfully, I'm not finding Miranda's southern accent as giggle-inducing as I did in that one episode of DuckTales I reviewed a while back. I think it's because the pitch is slightly different, so the laughs that Lee provides come from the funny exchanges he provokes.
What part of being an aeronaut?
Let me give you a tip, kid. Never upset a seagull.
You're not serious.
Not if I can help it.
On the whole, it really adds to the entertainment value of the show. Lee's role in particular seems to have been expanded on considerably, at least based on what he did in the first book, where he had like 2 exchanges with Lyra until the last quarter. Here, she is responsible for getting him to join them, and he gets attached to her pretty quickly. And it's the best. I am all for this change. He even gets something of an arc because of this, with Serafina telling him that he has a major part to play in the story, and he only accepts it once it becomes clear he has a hand in Lyra's fate, and he's willing to fight for this kid. You could say he's not throwing away his shot. Look, I made it through Mary Poppins Returns, and Lord knows how many episodic DuckTales reviews without a Hamilton reference. Let me have this. But Lee is not the only outcast about to get very protective of Lyra, since their paths crossed because they were both looking for a giant talking polar bear. This is Iorek Byrnison, a member of a species called the armored bears, who appears to be the most recognizable image associated with his dark materials outside of maybe the alethiometer. And man, does he live up to that legacy. Even when Iorek spends most of his introduction as an outcast, shamed into exile and servitude, he is such a strong, dominating force whenever he steps into frame. The animation on him in particular is just gorgeous. Strong yet beautiful, all at the same time. It's really a sight to behold for me. Coupled with a powerful, deep, booming voice, too. Props to Joe Tamberg on that front. Iorek also provides some of the most awe-inspiring moments in the entire series, particularly moments between him and Lyra. My personal favorite is when he dons his armor for the first time. It's arguably my favorite scene in the entire show so far. It was so striking they put it on the Blu-ray slipcover. Iorek likewise takes a strong liking to Lyra, since she was the one responsible for helping him be free and making himself whole again, and well, I think he has a soft spot for her cleverness and conviction. They form a pretty strong bond that's really kind of adorable. Once again, it's a more mature character watching Lyra prove her ability, surprising him with how well she handles such situations, and in the process gains a higher respect and admiration for her that builds up her own self-worth. And when Iorek changes her name to Lyra Silvertongue, it's not in a futile attempt to have her conform, but a symbol that represents Lyra's strengths that Iorek feels should more officially define her. Where Lyra's experiences with Asriel and Mrs. Coulter showed how much she didn't know about the world, her time among this group who set out to right the wrongs she wants to helps her have faith in herself, exercise her own abilities, and in the process, discover new ones. Being stubborn and determined enough to power through and try to find a way out of what feels like hopeless situations or travel into unknown territory. Knowing how to play for info, use her skills wisely, come up with deceptions at the drop of a hat, and seeing the value in unconventional allies, who all learn to trust and rely on Lyra even when they're all still looking out for her best interests, giving her the freedom and challenge to reach her full potential. She even discovers that she can read the alethiometer, which turns out to be an essential tool on this journey. Lyra starts the series wide-eyed and wishful, gets hit by a freight train of betrayal at the first opportunity to fulfill that desire, only to be picked back up again out of her own desire to do the right thing, and with the help of truly trustworthy people. Because sometimes a family is an aeronaut, a kitchen boy, a group of traveling Gyptians, and a giant talking polar bear in a handcrafted suit of armor. Of course, things get rather complicated along the way, which is where we have to talk about the journey of another. And this is where I'm going to give a spoiler warning, since this chain of events was not in the promotional material, but it's an essential piece of the series that I can't not talk about, so you've been warned. Where we have to talk about not Lyra, but another important kid from a distant land, Will Perry, played by Amir Wilson. Okay, so a recurring subplot in the series has been following this guy, Boreal, played by Ariane Bakare, an agent of the Magisterium sent on an ongoing investigation in our world? I mean, I know they mentioned other worlds being a thing in the first episode, but I'm not gonna lie, this gave me a bit of whiplash. Boreal has been using a rip-between world to investigate the man that Asriel got his research on dust from. Boreal discovers that Grumman was not only able to cross between worlds himself, but is heavily implied to have come from our world and went by the name of John Perry, played by Andrew Scott.
Miss me?
I haven't gotten the chance to. Okay, seriously, how is this the third thing I've reviewed in a row with Andrew Scott in it? Anyway, from that mysterious connection, it's clear that Will is going to be important to the events we've been following up to this point, while seeing him deal with his own ostracizing issues. Not to mention it raises several questions about his dad, who have been presumed dead on both sides. I'll admit, I wasn't that invested in this subplot for a while, mostly because it felt like it came out of nowhere. Like I said, it wasn't in any of the promotions for the show, and I joined in for the elaborate fantasy adventure and not as blatant as I thought jabs at religious organizations. But as the story went on and things got more intense and mysterious about what exactly connects Will and his family to everything else, it made me care a lot more about it, and Will, and just how it was going to come together with what was going on with Lyra and the others. Plus, watching again, the subplot with Boreal does build up the significance and mystique of this unusual branch in the story. If there's one thing Will and Lyra have in common, is that they're thrust into difficult situations due to circumstances beyond their control, which I'm sure will be an area expanded on come season 2. In terms of season 1, Lyra's adventure has waves of hope, for lack of a better phrase. On a personal level, she is put through the ringer, betrayed, tortured, and kidnapped multiple times, having to survive in highly dangerous scenarios with only her wits. But as we see time and again, Lyra's determination, and maybe just pure stubbornness to make it out of any situation, inspires others to fight harder and stronger, and there are times where that's enough to overpower greater forces and make things better. How far Lyra's come is clear when she eventually reunites with Asriel. While she still wishes he was more compassionate with her, Lyra knows now that she doesn't have to prove anything to him, and it's not up to Asriel if she's worthy enough to take on tougher challenges like traveling to the north, embracing the identity she forged for herself.
You don't want my name.
Silvertongue feels like my name. It was given to me by someone who actually loves me, which is better than I can say for you.
When Lyra runs into Mrs. Coulter again, she says she has to choose a side, who she belongs to. What Lyra sees is that both sides, in this case Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel, are corrupt, believing they know the best course humanity should take, blinded by their own ambitions and goals, and willing to make what they consider necessary sacrifices for the greater good. Whether either of them are right in their pursuit for a better world is yet to be seen, especially where Asriel is concerned, but all Lyra sees is injustice. Seeing two people she once respected willing to do horrible things for the sake of their missions. So instead of choosing a side, or being swayed by tragic circumstances that I am not going to spoil here, she chooses her own path, opposing those who want to shape her world to find answers for herself. Trust me, there's a lot more I can dive into here, but without going into major spoilers, I think this is as specific and in-depth as I can get. I think this is a good place to wrap. Overall, the first season of His Dark Materials impressed me as much as I was hoping it would. It's been a while since the show made me feel like I was venturing into uncharted territory, but I can easily say that the His Dark Materials series is a very promising show on its own, and from what I read from the first book, a pretty respectable adaptation. There are things changed, cut, and even added, like in any adaptation, but I think they kept a lot of what makes the story intriguing while tailoring it to get the ultimate investment out of a television audience. The world is brought to life with distinct, varied, and memorable locations, suspenseful roadblocks and challenges, beautiful animation and effects work, an incredibly strong cast, especially with Daphne Keane carrying the series magnificently, and theming and characters you could talk about for hours. Or at least I could. The first season, especially when it comes to Lyra Lyra, and even Will to an extent, came off to me like a more brutal look at a coming-of-age story. The troubles and unexpected challenges that come with slowly realizing more about the world, that people in power might not have your best interests at heart, even if they think they do, that those closest to you are capable of betraying your trust and faith in them, that true, loving connections can come from unexpected places, that we sometimes find our greatest strengths through our toughest challenges, and that small mistakes can have bigger consequences. By season's end, there's a lot of things up in the air, a greater journey to go on, the fate of multiple worlds in the hands of characters we're just beginning to truly understand, and likely tougher challenges that will hopefully be resolved well in the coming seasons. But for now, it's time to reveal my... The thing about the episodes of His Dark Materials is that they vary a lot in environment, goal, and progression, so I could see any episode of the season being someone's favorite, depending on what area the show is focused on in that particular episode. For me, that's episode 4, Armor. Even though there's still intense stuff going on, it felt like a bit of a breather after all the build-up and putting Lyra through so much. It displays her strengths in facing a challenge perfectly, and it introduced most of my favorite characters that were very easy to connect to and be excited to spend more time with. The first His Dark Materials book I read wasn't Golden Compass, but Once Upon a Time in the North, since I really wanted to know Lee and Iorek history that they hint at here. The episodes before felt like they were setting up a great journey, and this was the first real step into what the rest of the world outside of England had to offer, and I loved it. It is a very fun and rewatchable episode. Well, that's season 1 in a video that's still pretty long because I don't know when to shut up. Maybe we'll cover season 2 if this video does well, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.